welcome to Bury Our Bones With, the show that lives, breathes and dies the movies you love and the TV that just won't be forgotten. We are your hosts, me, Jimmy Murphy, and with me as always, the Christian Bale to my Christian rock, Ryan Etherington. In today's show, we'll be burying our bones with the 2008 Christopher Nolan masterpiece that is The Dark Knight. So join us as we put on our rubber gimp suits, go heavy with the guy liner, and find a sarcastic old cockney gent to give us unsolicited life advice.
Visit the Michael Caine Tangerine Emporium for all your citrus fruit needs. Visit us in-store to peruse our limitless supply of Burmese citrus fruits, plus browse our selection of Lunchables. Or shop online using discount code I Bloody Told You to receive a 10% discount on our lean, mean tangerine machine for all your juicing needs. That's the Michael Caine Tangerine Emporium, Bond Street, London, England. We have tangerines the size of rubies.
So it's the big one. It's a masterpiece, an event in and of itself. The Dark Knight.
The Dark Knight. One of your favourites, one of mine?
It's easily in my top 5. Easily.
Right on. Yeah.
There isn't a viewing where there isn't something new to pick out, something to look at, something to go, never made that connection before. It's not perfect, but I don't think there is a film that is perfect.
I think
it's probably as close to being perfect as probably there are anything else. July 18th, 2008 is the release date.
2008, yeah.
Which means that this film is just coming up on 15 years old this year, July 18th this year.
15 years already.
She was only 15.
She was only 15 years old.
Which you wouldn't think it to watch it. It doesn't feel like a film that's 15 years old.
No, it doesn't feel dated. Yeah, the special effects hold up. It's not ropey yet.
There are elements where you can query a choice made, or you can query a logic or something along those lines. But I know that I do that just so that I don't become biased towards it.
So
it's almost like I'm looking for something,
yeah,
because then I can say, oh yeah, it's not a perfect film like I've just said, because I think as soon as it becomes a perfect film, any criticism that you hear towards it, against it, then becomes
almost personal.
Personal and rather debilitating.
Yeah, it's a good bit. I remember when it came out, I was really, really excited for it when it came out. Obviously, I'd seen Batman Begins, which is, I think, 3 or 4, is it? I remember
2005.
2005, yeah. And I remember when Batman Begins came out, because I wasn't expecting it. I didn't even know a new Batman film was in the works. Quite frankly, after the Schumacher films, kind of just written them off. I don't think I'd even seen the last, I think, was it Batman and Robin? Was that the last one before that? The Clooney one anyway, wasn't it?
I think you're right. Yeah.
I don't think I even saw it. I've seen it since. I remember being in a comic book shop buying a Batman t-shirt, and the man in the comic book shop was like, there's a new film coming out. And I'm like, oh, right, yeah, that's good. He's like, it's taking it back to its dark roots. I was like, didn't Tim Burton already do that? I think we've already been there. And he's like, no, that's Christopher Nolan. I never heard of Christopher Nolan at the time.
Not a lot of people had.
Was it like Memento, I think?
By that point, it was Memento and Insomnia.
Are
probably the two big films that people remember. Did also release a very short film, hour and 10-minute film called Following, which is, it's not a bad little film.
I've never even heard of it. Yeah.
Which was his first kind of big, well, I say big, but it wasn't big, but essentially the first
large production.
Larger production.
Right. Yeah, well, I remember when it came out, the first one, obviously, Batman Begins, and I loved it. I thought it was really good. Had very low expectations. Loved it. I wouldn't say it went under the radar, because I don't think it did at all. But when this film was coming out, the sequel, around 2008, I feel like I spent a lot of my time asking people if they'd seen Batman Begins, because I'd mentioned The Dark Knight, and they'd look at you like, you're a bit old for that. And I'd be like, have you seen Batman Begins? Like, I'll go watch it. And then it feels like everyone I then told to go watch Batman Begins watched it and went and watched The Dark Knight afterwards. That's how it feels, do you know what I mean? It felt like a lot of people, it passed a lot of people by, that first film. And then this movie, especially with obviously the tragedy with Heath Ledger, sort of propelled it media-wise to another level. But it's such a good movie.
Batman Begins for me was what opened my eyes to Batman. Obviously, I was aware of it. I'd seen bits and bobs. I don't think you could grow up in the 20th century and not know something about Batman. But I wasn't necessarily a fan, you could say, and watched it one Saturday night with my parents on just, I'll stick that on, see what that's like. Thought it was good. Thought it, kind of let it just wash over me. And then by the time The Dark Knight came out, again, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I remember watching that Batman Begins film. That was okay. I think I remember speaking to you about it, and you were saying, have you seen it yet? And I was like, no. And he's like, you need to see it. Yeah. I remember watching it and going, why have I not liked Batman up until this point? Why? What have I been doing?
What have I been missing? Yeah.
And so obviously...
Unfortunately, up until that point, not much. Cinematically speaking, anyway.
Yeah, and I think obviously we come at things from a slightly different viewpoint because of, you were at a different time in your life when you saw it, as was I. So it's slightly different watching it. But yeah, if Batman Begins was the thing that opened my eyes to Batman, The Dark Knight was the thing that made me go, oh, you've got to go and do some stuff on Batman. Even if it, I remember thinking, I know nothing's probably going to be as good as what I've just watched, but I just want to consume the lore, and so I think very shortly after that, I was like, I'm going to get all the Batman films and I'm going to watch them all.
Yeah. How did it feel going backwards? Because 1989's Batman, Burton's Batman, that's my Batman, really. Like, I would have been 10 when that came out, and it was everything to me and all of my friends. It was everything. That was the movie. And I really like Batman Returns. I know it gets panned a lot, like the sequel he did. I think it's great. I think both of those Burton movies are brilliant in their own ways. I think I think it's true to say, like, Batman's never really truly been put on screen as he is in the comic books. It's not really ever got a proper representation of him. But those Burton movies, and then obviously later on the Nolan movies, are just some of the best. The best. I wouldn't even call them superhero movies in the way that I think of a Marvel superhero movie. They're not. There's something other to them,
The Dark Knight trilogy basically said to anybody who scoffed at comic books and scoffed at superheroes, they said, it's not a superhero movie. This is action. This is as good an action movie as you will find. We're
going to ground it in reality.
I'd venture to say greatest action film of all time. I think,
Right.
I don't want to commit quite to that, but
it's up there for you.
It has to be in that conversation.
How did it feel going back? So if you started in real terms, you probably started at Batman Begins then?
Yeah, that probably would have been. Yeah. As I say, I can't remember watching anything Batman, but properly watching Batman based before that point. And I can vividly remember watching Batman Begins. So that would have been the first taste. The Dark Knight. Going back, how
old would you have been at Batman Begins era,
So
roughly?
Batman Begins, 2005, I'd have been about 13.
Perfect age for it.
Yeah, and it was that kind of thing going, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, why have I not seen this kind of stuff before? Like, obviously it then becomes very abundant. Why? Because I think that Dark Knight trilogy, it's very difficult to compare them to anything else in that, and to be fair, anything that's come since. I think it's such a standalone thing where it isn't a comic book movie. It's not a Batman movie in a sense. It's just a movie, which when I watch it, I'm not thinking necessarily about the lore, or I'm not thinking about, that's a nod to
You're
this.
not thinking about the canon.
I'm just watching it, and I'm just, I think we both have similar kind of minds where we watch a film and we look at it and we analyse it and we kind of go, okay, well, narratively, what's that trying to do? I think anybody listening will kind of get that impression from us speaking about movies. But this movie, I didn't make any notes.
Yeah.
And I didn't realise I wasn't making notes until 3/4 of the way through the film, because I'm just there absorbing.
Engrossed. Yeah.
And so comparing it particularly to Joel Schumacher's films, because they're so far removed. It's you could call it anything.
Yeah.
It's so far removed. It doesn't have any real link and basis. Whereas I think the Burton movies, again, they offer something entirely different. They go into a different.
There's a darkness in the Burton movies that aren't in the Schumacher movies.
Yeah. There's it's almost, I think probably because it would have been the first, big budget Batman movie that wasn't based on the 60s TV show. And so it was like, again, subverting people's views and going, this isn't your TV show. Yeah. This isn't the cowl.
Yeah.
All that. There's elements of that.
And then Schumacher tried to take it back to the 60s TV show.
Yeah, I think a quote he was used as saying Batman isn't camp enough, in reference to Tim Burton's movies, which, to be fair,
was
are still pretty camp.
It's quite camp,
but done in a way where there's as you say, there is a darkness to it.
Well, I heard the person who was sort of single-handedly, like doggedly pursued getting the Burton Batman movies made, being interviewed. He said no one would make them because of the 60s Batman. He worked in the movie industry, and he'd take it to heads of I guess Warner Brothers, whoever it was. You own this property, you should make this movie. And they was just like, no one wants to see a Batman movie. It took him years, 10 years to get it done. And it was like a personal passion project for him. And eventually it happened. And at that point, everyone was shitting on the 60s Batman. That's campy rubbish. This is where it's at. Like you say, it's quite camp, really, when you watch the Burton movies. There's definitely campy elements in there. But I think when you get to sort of now with Batman, I think people have realised there's room for the 60s Batman. There's room for the 80s Batman. Not a lot of room for the Schumacher Batman. And obviously, I think a lot of that is down to Nolan's representation of the Batman films. He managed to take them to a place where not only fans were really happy that they finally got to see a Batman. Again, it's not the Batman from comic books, but they got to see a really decent representation of Batman in film. And he also made it bankable. Apparently, when the first one came out, the studio were hesitant after they saw it about how much free rein they gave him to make it dark and realistic. And they were talking about putting in cuts and all of that sort of stuff, but they didn't. They let it go out, and then you get that first movie. Like I say, was a good, successful movie. Then you get to Dark Knight, and it's literally leaps and bounds ahead again from that first Nolan movie, isn't it?
Yeah, and in terms of bankable, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, so it was given a budget of $185 million, which is a substantial budget by no means. Let's not diminish that. About $228 million in today's money. But in its opening weekend, bearing in mind it had a $185 million budget, it made $158 million in its opening weekend.
Wow.
So you've made, I mean, when when it's a $40 million film and you make back a third of your budget or a 2/3 or, half your budget, that's really good. But when it's $185 million and you make back almost 22-ish million shy of your budget, it's kind of,
in the opening weekend.
Yeah, there's an element of they must have been, when it was released, there must have been that palpable kind of, we've got something here.
Good.
And in terms of, so US and Canada gross $534 million.
Wow.
Which is, over double and then some, so 3 times almost the budget. But in terms of the gross worldwide, just under $1.1 billion.
That's box office.
That's at the box office.
Wow.
And today that's what 1.25 billion in today's
just
money.
On the box office, because this is also the time of Blu-ray.
Absolutely. And
that bank. I mean, how many copies have you bought of this film?
I must have brought about 6 different copies of this film.
In this house at the moment, I think I've got at least 4. I think I've got at least 4 copies of this movie.
And I haven't watched this for about a couple of years because I suppose one of the drawbacks of this film, if we're really reaching, which I think we are, is that it doesn't feel long when you're watching it, but it's one of those films where you need to say, have I got the next 3 hours to kill, allowing for toilet and refreshment breaks.
And recording podcasts afterwards.
It's, you need to set aside a good amount of time. So that's probably why I haven't watched it more, because I have to go, have I got time to just sit down and watch that? Which in today's world, we often don't. So thank you for this podcast, for giving me the opportunity to watch the films that I love.
I mean, that's the thing, I have a sort of very loose rule that films should only be about an hour and a half long. But I always caveat it by not every film can tell its story in an hour and a half, hour 40, 90 odd minutes, This is one of those films. It's a 3-hour long movie. There's a lot going on in this movie. The pacing's fine though. I think that's why it doesn't feel long, because it doesn't hang about. It's not rushed, but it's not hanging about, and the pacing is just right. And there's always something just about to happen. As soon as something's finished happening, there's a breath, and then it moves on to the next thing. And the pacing, the editing, and obviously the directing, that is amazing, and it keeps a 3-hour long film feeling fresh for those 3 hours.
Yeah, and I think we are in a day and age where I think this is probably one of the films that started the trend. I think it started a hell of a lot of trends which have now become cliched, overdone, and to the point where it's a little bit tiresome. Not when you watch this film, but just in general, like, we don't need to see this again. We don't need to see that again. But this, for me, I mean, putting it all out there, I know I'll get some criticism for this because he is a bit formulaic in the way in which he does things, but this, for me, cemented Nolan as being a trustworthy director. So if I read, okay, this next film is 182 minutes long, usually I'd go, for example, Avatar, no way in the world I'm going to see that. Like, I don't want to sit down. If it was Nolan directing, I'd go and do it because I trust, and that's not, and I trust James Cameron to some extent, but this was the first film that was quite long where I'm going, that did not seem like 2 hours and 24 minutes, which again, by today's standards, is not that long. Yeah. It's long, but it's not getting to the Avengers Endgame, runtime, 3 hours 10, I think that is, which...
Yeah, when Lord of the Rings came out, which is, to my mind, in modern times, those first films that were pushing that sort of 2.5, 3 hour. I can't remember. I think the special editions are 3 hours. I think the cinematic ones were about 2.5, maybe. And I remember that being incredibly long, especially the last one with the 300 endings that it has. Love the films, don't get me wrong.
I've not seen a single one of them. I've never been interested in Lord of the Rings, and the fact that they're that long means I'm definitely not interested in them.
Right. Yeah, see, I love them. You couldn't watch them now because the special effects, groundbreaking at the time, and they're still really good. They are of their time. I saw, or I read someone asking Peter Jackson about, is there any chance you could go back and just tidy it up a bit? And he was like, they don't even make the computers that was made on anymore. They're on hard disks. You know what I mean? Floppies.
Are you telling me it was all made on Betamax?
I love the Lord of the Rings. Interestingly enough, I've never seen an Avatar movie. I have no interest in it. Same sort of thing. But it's like how you're saying you trust Cameron. Cameron's a great director. We all know that. There's a criticism that I often hear leveled about Avatar is there's just a lot of long flying shots in it.
It's essentially a long tech demo.
Yeah.
Which once you've seen it for 10 minutes, that's great. It's not going to deviate that much from
someone
that.
said to him, do you really need this particular flying scene to be this long? People will get bored. And he said, if I want to see it, someone else wants to see it. Like, that was his attitude. It's like, you have a different motivation though, so it's very hard to say, but it's like you say, it's a film that started a lot of trends. It's with the superhero genre, if you like, 3-hour-long movies maybe being one of them. If you look at the movies that were out, the other superhero movies would have been like, Spider-Man in their first attempt at a Hulk would have been around the same time. So the Tobey Maguire era Spider-Man, Sam Raimi Spider-Man.
That was 2002. I think by 2004 we had Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, that sounds right.
2000.
I want to say 8 is.
Yeah,
is
so
the
we
third.
may have had Spider-Man in the same year, perhaps 2009. I can't quite remember from memory, but they were.
I know they mention it in Knocked Up, didn't they? I like Spider-Man 3.
Yeah, there's certainly films that.
I'm sure that's 8, but I could be wrong. Yeah,
they are so much comic book films that.
Yeah,
that's why this was so, because everybody looked at it going. It's one of those.
That's what's interesting. If you look at how Marvel now dominates cinema, and then you look at back when like the first Batman came out, particularly. You've got the first Hulk film didn't really work. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man films were incredibly successful, and up until they were all successful, but no one liked the third one. I think everyone liked the first one.
Yeah, everybody hated the third one, and for good reason.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So Marvel hadn't found their feet at this point either. Batman was still the superhero movie, wasn't it? He was the bankable one.
Yeah, it certainly influenced the ability to go. Just from, one thing that the Marvel cinematic universe, that wasn't a thing necessarily.
Didn't exist, no, that's right.
But now it's become a thing. And I think a large portion of that is because the trilogy of The Dark Knight tells a through line story. It's not, now we're doing this story of Batman, and it's not really related to the last one.
Yeah.
Everything has that kind of through line, and it's almost...
Sorry.
It's one story. It's not 3 stories that happen to be part of the same franchise.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's like, for example, the X-Men films, 3 completely different stories, a little bit of harking back to the old ones, but there's no real kind of looking at character development from the last one.
That's right.
Yeah,
because you would have had the first X-Men movie out at this point as well. Wouldn't you?
That's 2000.
Yeah, it's a good movie. Yeah.
And then 2002, I believe, was X-Men X2. And then I think 2000.
X2's not a good movie, though.
I think X2's the best of that early trilogy.
Really?
Yeah.
I really like the first one.
I like the first one, but there's a lot of flaws with it.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Always is.
But
it's what's interesting about it is that first X-Men movie when he's saying, what would you rather see, yellow spandex? And everyone's like, ha, because they're all in leather, aren't they?
Yeah.
And it's not long after that, they're all in their proper superhero colours.
And absolutely. At the time, that was like laughing at the audience because why would you want to see him in yellow spandex? That's in the comic book. Whereas now it's like, why are you not in your yellow spandex?
It's the complete 360.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting, like you say, because the beginning of this movie all like picks up from Batman Begins. You see what becomes of the Scarecrow. You know what I mean? And you see the vigilantes. Like, it ties up threads left from the first movie at the very beginning, just to get. I mean, obviously not the very beginning opening scene, which is amazing, but shortly thereafter. Yeah,
I mean that opening set piece is, it's flawless. It just. Again, how many and to be fair, how many big budget action films do you get? You get a little bit of an action scene, bang, we go to titles. There's no titles at all.
No, that's right.
There's the blue fire of the bat symbol, and then we're into it, you know?
No, that's very true, yeah.
So, obviously directed by Christopher Nolan, as we've mentioned, and much like a lot of Christopher Nolan films, he has a big hand in almost every avenue of it. So he also co-wrote the story, or the screenplay, I should say, with his brother Jonathan Nolan. The story, he had help from David S. Goyer, who apparently asked the question in an interview, why did Chris put my name on this? I didn't do anything. I had a little look at it and advised on some revisions. So and that's him saying that, honest. You know. Yeah. And if you've seen any other of David S. Goyer's work, you may go, that makes a bit more sense.
Really?
He's had some good films, but not films where to the same kind of stature. And Nolan also produces this as well with Lorne Orleans, Charles Roven, and his wife Emma Thomas. And I think that's why everything kind of feels a little bit more thought through, because it's not one person bringing an idea to another person who then puts that down on paper, and then that person takes that idea and takes it to the producer, and the producer goes, oh, okay, I'll do this. There is that through
singular
line.
Vision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that makes it very easy to kind of go, that's not what we're doing here. Whereas when you've got, you know, too many cooks and all of that, it means it's very easy to go, oh, well, this isn't what we set out to do. It's become something completely different.
Yeah, especially with these studio movies. Like, it's a tale as old as time, the studio involvement in movies just destroying anything that they come there because they think they know best. And I think it's probably a testament. I would say they gave him Batman Begins and went, okay, do what you want. Then weren't sure if they'd done the right thing, and then it was huge success. So then he's like, well, I want to control a bigger slice of it. And they went, go ahead. And this is the movie you get. That when it's like the studio getting out of the way, and all of a sudden you have not only a bankable movie, you have great art at the same time. Something that they've clearly failed to replicate since he's left. You know,
they gave him a lot of leeway, and again, not only did he build, as I said earlier, built the trust in me as an audience member, going, I want to go and see that, even though it's this long. Same with Hollywood. They've gone, you want to do for example, Tenet, you want to do a 3-hour film about what again? Same with Inception. What's that about? Oh, we give you more budget than we gave you for The Dark Knight because we've seen what you can do. So, you know, it sets the foundations quite a lot. I think for me as well, it's the first kind of eye-opening gaze into the work of Hans Zimmer, which is as much a part of the movie as anything else. Had a lot of help. Well, I say had a lot of help, I think, but is also a credit from James Newton Howard as well, who had a hand in this as well. To what extent, I'm not quite sure, but he's credited on there. And the cinematographer, which is Wally, I'm going to say Feister.
Cool.
Because the way it looks like a very different word, but let's go Wally Feister, who's worked on a few Nolan films until he decided to go into directing himself. Right. So again, it's become almost a meme now, a bit like you get the established directors who use the same people, use the same actors. I saw a meme the other day of, because there's some promotion about Oppenheimer coming out later this year. There's a gif of Gary Oldman, incidentally, in Leon the Professional, where he says, bring me everyone. He says, who do you want me? And he goes, everyone, in his, maniacal way. And it says, Nolan casting for Oppenheimer, But again, that clout has come from the seeds that were planted saying, this is what I can do, So there's so much to talk about in every avenue of this film that you could probably do 2 or 3 podcasts, but we won't subject you to that.
Yeah.
So obviously we spoke a little bit about Christopher Nolan. So previously he'd only really done Following being his first major film, and then Memento in 2000, and then Insomnia, which again is a horrifically underrated film.
I think you say racist. It's a horrifically racist
Yeah, that's the director's cut.
I was like, I don't remember that. It was quite a good movie.
I think it's a really underrated film.
Insomnia. That's Al Pacino, right?
Al Pacino, Robin Williams.
Yeah.
And it's based off a Swedish film with Stellan Skarsgård.
Right.
And again, that's the first glimpse we get of Robin Williams being not Dance Around the Walls comedy. It's he plays a guy accused of killing and raping a girl.
Yeah. Is it before 1 Hour Photo? It's around the same time,
2002,
isn't it? Yeah.
so it's couple of years, maybe even 1 year before 1 Hour Photo. But I reckon somebody saw Insomnia and went, why have we not done that before?
Yeah,
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And I think actually it's quite interestingly goes into some of the casting or potential spoken about casting for this film, because one of the names that was potentially put forward, and I know Robin Williams had a lot of interest in playing in the Joker, but Robin Williams,
interesting.
And not that we need anything other than Heath Ledger's Joker in this.
I'm gonna go to bat for Robin Williams. I think 1 Hour Photo Robin Williams,
I think
Insomnia Robin Williams would do a good job.
I think it's one of those things.
Your gut instinct is no, like Mork from Ork, like no thanks. I actually think,
Mrs. Doubtfire. She's got a bit mad with the makeup.
Yeah, I think a dialed in Robin Williams, I could see it in the hands of Christopher Nolan. Definitely, 100%. Because that's the thing. Like Heath Ledger as the Joker was a very controversial choice at the time.
Everybody hated it.
I'll be honest, I wasn't a fan. I thought Cillian Murphy, who'd already played the Scarecrow, so there was no way he was going on to play the Joker. I was like, you should have saved him for the Joker. He's perfect, you know. And I was like, Heath Ledger, I don't see it. I just don't see it, you know. I wasn't full of hate. That's not how I get down, you know what I mean? I'm not going to be like on the internet complaining and stuff. But I was like, I don't see it.
Yeah, and again, we spoke a little bit about instilling faith, but again, it's those kinds of things that says he's made a bold choice. He could have gone the easy option. He could have just, because I know Jack Nicholson was interested, he could have recast Jack Nicholson, and people probably would have liked it, and it would have been, I think, you know, it's difficult to kind of how it would fit in that universe. But that could have worked as well. And that would have been the easy option. That would have been, it's Jack Nicholson, how can you go wrong?
Yeah.
But he didn't. He goes, Heath Ledger, that guy from A Knight's Tale, the guy from Brokeback Mountain. Yeah. And everyone, as you say, everybody kind of went, what? What's that
I can't
about?
See it.
And I can still see those kind of threads. So I can remember when Dunkirk came out and everybody was harking about, they've got Harry Styles in there. What's going on? And I was like, I'm not worried at all. Yeah. I remember saying to everybody, don't worry about it. Yeah. Just do not worry about it. And they're like, but it's going to be so... Don't worry about it. And I watched it and he did not feel out of place at all. Yeah. Coincidentally, look at most films he's been in since Dunkirk and it's like... Oh,
there's Harry Styles.
Exactly. That.
But interesting enough, I had the same conversations when the Dark Knight Rises came out, or before it came out, sorry, and they said, they're doing Bane. And everyone was like... And I was like, trust him. Did you not see the last film? He knows what he's doing. Like I learned my lesson the moment I saw Dark Knight, and Heath Ledger's now iconic performance may never be topped, to be fair. And then everyone was doing what people do, complaining about, the wrestler dude. And I'm like, it's not going to suck. You just know, like having seen what he did with the Joker and with Batman Begins, the Scarecrow, the way he handled the Scarecrow was brilliant as well. You just have faith. You know what I mean? I knew it was going to be good, and Tom Hardy didn't disappoint, did he? You know?
And with the casting of Heath Ledger, I've obviously said about Jack Nicholson being an easy choice. Some of the names that were in there are kind of not more interesting choices, but they're choices that kind of fit. So Paul Bettany was a name that wanted the role. Again, gangster number one. There's some menacing moments in that.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's easy to see. Adrian Brody, another name.
The bloke from the piano.
I think the acting chops of Adrian Brody is kind of what what
Yeah,
means
but
I think it would be nowhere near the level of what we've seen, but it's not a bad choice, shall we say?
I can't get past Agent Brody in the Predator movie anymore, though. You know, that is some bad casting.
Yeah,
like Agent Brody as a mercenary tough guy. I just couldn't buy it. You know what I mean? And so you say Agent Brody, and I go, no, no.
It soured your taste of it.
Yeah, every time I see him, I just see the miscasting of that Predators movie.
Yeah, Steve Carell was also a name, which
okay.
I mean, if you've seen him in Foxcatcher,
I have not.
He is amazing in Foxcatcher. It is a role where you go, it helps he's a little bit under prosthetics, so he doesn't quite look like the guy from The Office, the US version, not the UK version. But it, so that helps. But there's a menacing kind of unpredictable nature about it. So maybe not in 2008, but certainly now is a choice where you go, okay, yeah, I can see
maybe.
that. There's elements there.
In the hands of a skillful director, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
And what's interesting is that with all of these names, despite people saying, he was originally a casting choice, all of these were people who wanted to do it. Nolan, from day one, pretty much had Heath Ledger in mind.
That's cool. Yeah.
Which, I mean, tells you an insight into Nolan's mind where there's nothing really before in Heath Ledger's work where you go, that's where I can see.
There, like, yeah.
That's where to make that choice, it's bordering line on genius. So some other interesting, I think obviously the biggest probably casting choice in this is obviously the replacement of Katie Holmes as Rachel Dawes.
I find it hard to get past. It's one of those things. It doesn't ruin the movie for me at all, and I've got nothing against Maggie Gyllenhaal, but I would have loved to have seen what Katie Holmes would have done in this role. Yeah, I think
it's probably the only thing that, and it doesn't take me out of it, but it's the only thing that dangers on taking me out of it, because it does feel like, again, because there isn't and not that there could be, I can imagine in a Marvel universe where they have a little joke about, you look different these days, that kind of thing, which I think I've seen when they've recast, or where they use somebody from a different universe. They go, you look a bit different from the last time I saw you, and it's kind of nod, wink to the camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I say, it's nothing against Maggie Gyllenhaal. I think it is just because I think we grew accustomed quite quickly to Katie Holmes in that role. I thought, again, that was a really understated performance from, and I don't think Maggie Gyllenhaal goes over the top with it, but it certainly feels a little bit more, and perhaps it's the writing to trying not to be biased, in the sense of there's not a lot to really kind of play with. So, and I don't know how much of that was because they knew they couldn't get Katie Holmes back, so they kind of drew back on that character and used that more as a motivational kind of character rather than a character who has big influence on the story actively, shall we say. Yeah,
do you know why they couldn't get her back?
So I read that she decided to go and work with Diane Keaton and Queen Latifah in a film called Mad Money.
I know the film, yeah.
I have no idea.
It's not a good choice.
I have no idea what that film is.
Wow.
And, I mean, that is about... Could you imagine being in that position and going, I'll do this film? I mean, it's a testament to her professionalism by saying, I've already signed up to this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like...
Yeah. That's not a good
knowing
choice.
What we know now, it must be a really... She must kind of kick herself.
Yeah.
Mind you, she doesn't really need the money being... Is she still married to Tom Cruise?
What, at the time of the movie?
She was at the time.
She was at the time, yeah.
Either way, she doesn't really need the money.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where you go, that's kind of one of those big what-if moments where you think... I would have loved to have seen what she would have done with the role in the second movie.
Yeah. There's nothing against Maggie Gyllenhaal. It's like you say, it's just one of those moments. It's just one of those things you can't help but note when you're watching the film.
I think some of the choices that were involved were Sarah Michelle Gellar was a talked about name, which again I think that would have been Having said that,
if it had been her from the get go, I think you wouldn't notice it. It would work.
And almost anybody in Nolan's hands, I don't really worry about. So, but it's a bit of an out there choice, shall we say? Isla Fisher was another choice.
Okay, yeah.
Believable. Emily Blunt, solid choice. I think at the time wasn't quite what she is now, so perhaps that's why, because they thought, not that Maggie Gyllenhaal was necessarily a big name, but and Rachel McAdams was another one, which I think would have been a really good choice as well. That would make
sense, yeah.
But I think the difficult thing when you're stepping into a role which, unlike the previous films in the Batman kind of series, where they did have kind of continuing characters, but it wasn't necessarily a through story, so it didn't really matter if they were recast or not. Whereas here, it kind of does, because it is part of the same story. It's part of the same... Yeah,
it picks up from the last movie.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So...
Because the promise that she makes him, that he keeps talking about in this film, is made in the first film. It's not made in this film.
Yeah, it's one of those... I think it's one of the first startings of from a comic book film where you can watch it without having seen the previous film, but if you've seen it, it helps an awful lot, because you do get all of those kind of...
You get the backstory. That's the thing. It's the great thing about this movie, and obviously there's no need for it, but I think we were talking about this before. I never need to see a Bruce Wayne origin story, but a Batman origin story involving Bruce Wayne's parents getting shot in an alleyway ever again. It's one of the first things that happens in Snyder's Batman. You see them pearls in the street again, so you get all that in the first Nolan movie, and it's done really well. There's nothing wrong with it.
And I think at the time as well, we hadn't necessarily seen that done to death, so we accepted it a lot more, because I think we probably only really saw it in Burton's Batman. So when you've seen it once, okay, this is a different interpretation of it. When you then see it a second time, third time, a fourth time, that's when you kind of go, everybody knows his parents have been killed. Yeah.
If you don't know the Batman origin story at this point, why are you what are you doing in the theatre watching a Batman movie? Yeah. So you don't, obviously it's great you don't get that, but you get all of the backstory leading up to this film is done in the first film. All that heavy lifting is done in the first film. How he knows Rachel, he mentions she's my oldest friend or something like that at one point in the film. But they don't over-labor the point. They assume you've watched the first film and they just get on with it. And it's a 3-hour-long film. If they wanted to, I'm sure they could have crammed some more. Do you remember when we were at school together? But they don't bother. They leave it alone, and they treat you like an adult.
Absolutely. And part of that same ethos is an interesting little tidbit. So Cillian Murphy, playing Dr. Jonathan Crane, aka Scarecrow, is the first instance of a villainous character being in a subsequent movie playing the same role, played by the same actor.
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't it? Yeah.
So that tells you about, it's not just the next Batman film. It's actually part of that same story. Yeah. So it has a beginning, has a middle. Yeah. This is the middle, and it has an end. The Dark Knight Rises.
And that's the thing. Those opening 10, 20 minutes, whatever it is, where it's the epitome of show me, don't tell me cinema. Do you know what I mean? He's not telling you anything. He's showing you that time has moved on. Here's some vigilantes dressed up like Batman. Here's the Scarecrow. Here's the Joker that they name drop at the end of the first film with the playing cards. You might want to have a look at this guy, and I hope the next film's going to be the Joker. That sort of stuff. But they don't tell you anything. He doesn't say, it's been X amount of time. This is now happening. That he shows you it, which is what great filmmakers do. They show, don't tell. And the whole film's like that. But those opening 20 odd minutes where he's showing you everything you need to know without repeating himself. It's all fresh. It's all interesting. It's all entertaining.
And it does a brilliant job of introducing new characters into a set universe that we've kind of already invested in. So obviously we've got Harvey Dent, a new character that which we hadn't seen before in that iteration, played again not flawlessly but played pretty well by Aaron Eckhart. Some other names that were talked about, Ryan Felipe, horrible choice, but in Nolan's hands I'd give it a go.
I mean,
Cruel Intentions for those who are trying to picture.
How close? I mean, you say it was mentioned. I mean, was it mentioned to Nolan and he went, no.
All I've got is he was considered.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
In the same sentence, it says, and a much more believable because of his work on The Prestige, Hugh Jackman for the role of Harvey Dent, which, again, I think that would have been a really good choice.
Prestige is such a good movie.
Easily my favourite film. We will get onto that one day.
Yeah, 100%. I love that.
We won't go too much into that, otherwise it becomes...
I think you might. Did you give me The Prestige? Because everyone always confuses it with The Illusionist, don't they? Like, whenever you go, have you ever seen The Prestige?
For those who can't see, I'm now seething because I hate the fact it's compared with The Illusionist.
I know, right? And it's like, no, watch The Prestige. It's a great movie.
It's like comparing Twinings with Bargain Budget. Have you seen this tea bag that's been here for a
blue
year?
Stripe tea bag? But people always do. No, what usually happens is people go, have you ever seen that film, The Illusionist, with Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman? And you mean The Prestige? And they go, yeah, that's the one.
And those people, there is a special place in hell waiting for you. But yeah, so the work that Hugh Jackman done on The Prestige means that it's not too much of a stretch to see him in Harvey Dent. And actually, I think Hugh Jackman, some of his roles beyond that point, it's been, we've seen elements of that. So I don't think that's too much of a jump.
Yeah, he could play. He can play straight-laced with an edge, I think, quite well. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then lastly, in terms of casting choices, so a slightly probably comical, I suppose, from what I kind of remember, but Bob Hoskins was he auditioned for the role of Sal Maroney, which is played by Eric Roberts.
Was he going to do his Mario voice?
Maybe Nolan said, we've already got one Cockney, we don't need another. I can't picture that, to be fair.
I mean, no disrespect to the late great Bob Hoskins, man.
Yeah, and here's a name which I think I'd give my left foot for if there was a bit more meat on the bone in the script for Sal Maroney, James Gandolfini.
He'd be brilliant.
I mean, you don't even need to question that. You just...
Yeah, he'd be brilliant.
It is, it's a sideways step.
Yeah.
It's Tony Soprano.
It's not a stretch.
But again, obviously we've lost James Gandolfini and we've lost a few people, but James Gandolfini for me is the one where he's so underrated.
Yeah.
Like, I know people like him in this, obviously love him in The Sopranos, but he horrifically underrated. He doesn't get spoken about enough how good he is. I mean, for those who don't know, I studied acting, and I can remember being given an audition piece, which is the speech that James Gandolfini's character gives in True Romance.
Yeah, I know the one. Yeah.
And
you got a lot of heart, kid.
It's just the element of just the believability that killing people, killing this, brutalizing this young woman is every day, is mundane. And again, it's believable because James Gandolfini brings that believability to it. And it's in such a, nothing is ham-fisted, nothing is shoved down your throat. It's the kind of little, I think there's a line where he says, blowing somebody's brains out, that's the easy part. That line in and of itself, you go, what? What is he talking about? And here, again, I think perhaps it's probably a good thing that he wasn't in this because there isn't enough on that character. He would have been forgotten in this because there's there's a lot. There's bits in here where I love Eric Roberts' portrayal of Sal Maroni, and it fits. But if you give somebody like James Gandolfini, I can imagine a lot of people would have said, "You've got James Gandolfini, and that's what you do with him."
Yeah,
they would have had to have bulk up that role a lot more for it to really get the get the value for money out of it.
By 2008, do you think it would have been a bit like, what's Tony Soprano doing in this movie, playing a gangster? Because like you say, it's a sideways step for him. I mean, he's great. I saw him in some terrible Christmas movie with Ben Affleck once.
Oh, is that Christmas with a Crank?
It's something like that. Yeah, it's Ben Affleck's really.
Ben Affleck will do that to you.
Ben Affleck. It's an odd film to watch. I mean, say what you will about Ben Affleck's acting, unless you've seen that Christmas movie, like it makes you respect his acting in other movies. It's so bad, I can't work it out. I can't work out what he's going for other than a paycheck. It's so weird. But Gandolfini in that movie is excellent.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything, even the throwaway parts like. Probably a lesser known film, a film called Fallen, Denzel Washington,
not seen
John Goodman. Again, great movie. We will have to cover that at some point. Basically, very, very quickly, I know we haven't given the plot of this movie, but the plot of that movie is there's a demon who basically can possess you through touch, and he's in he's in this killer's body, and he gets out. And he kind of goes on a bit of starts to torment Denzel Washington. James Gandolfini's in that, and there's a bit where he gets the touch from this demon, and it's like everything you've wanted. It's same with John Goodman, he's good in that. But we're starting to digress into other things. I think we've got enough to talk about with this to be totally honest. So one thing that I think is really, really shrewd about this, and I've always thought it, but it's since been confirmed. I've always liked the fact that we talk about origins and how much we've seen the origins of Bruce Wayne's, origins, and how we don't need to see it. It would have been so easy to give you some backstory into Joker and to give you some, here's why he's like, here's why he's the way he is. Much like it done in the Burton, gives you a bit of context and a little bit of stuff before he becomes the Joker. Yeah. And I've always thought the fact that you have absolutely no idea who this guy is, other than the fact he refers to himself as the Joker, just makes it that much more menacing and unpredictable, because you have no, I can understand why he's doing this, because this is what happened to him. You can't do that because you've got nothing. They say in the movie, we've got nothing was found on him, no ID, nothing apart from some knives and some lint.
But the greatest movie villains have no backstory, and you give them backstory and it reduces them somehow. Not like Darth Vader. You get to the prequels, and it's interesting. As a fan, I like Star Wars, and I don't hate the prequels the way most Star Wars fans do. They say no one hates Star Wars as much as a Star Wars fan, what I mean? But it does somehow, knowing his backstory. That first movie, it's like, who is Darth Vader? Then you get a backstory, and it's fine. But then seeing his backstory as Anakin and the jarring nature of Hayden Christensen, that dude, the jumper dude, all the way up to essentially James Earl Jones, and the Joker's one of those, you get the Tim Burton backstory, which is basically lifted from the Red Hood comic book. Or the Killing Joke, comic book where he plays the Red Hood. Killing Joke's an amazing comic book. And I think they lean into that a little bit with the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix, don't they? And that's a perfectly reasonable film, the Joker movie. It's Scorsese-esque and all that. It's fine. But I agree with you. The fact that he keeps changing his story about his scars throughout the movie adds to that you just don't know where. Like, you think the first time you see it, I'll tell you how I got these scars. You go, oh, right, there you go, backstory. And then he tells a different story. And he goes to tell a different story. And you're like, it's like you say, it's just that unpredictability, that not knowing. Does the shark in Jaws need a backstory? You know what I mean? It's that sort of thing, you know?
You know, the mind's imagination is so much more frightening than the reality.
That's right.
And, you know, it takes some, you know, elements of horror roots, of the sense of, you know, we've got this creature, we don't really know what it looks like. That's the scary part. And then you see it and you're like, is that it? You know, and it's very similar here. And one of the things that I think John Nolan and David S. Goyer kind of spoke about was they didn't want to explore that, and they used this quote. This was so that the character could be presented as an absolute, and it makes so much sense. It is what it is. You need to deal with the now and not worry about where he's come from.
Yeah,
because if you do that, you're not ready for him.
Yeah, can you be an agent of chaos with a backstory? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can, you know, any element of it means you can then start to predict the next move. And if your whole thing is about not being able to predict the next move, it's you know.
Some men just want to watch the world burn. You know, it's clearly explained by Alfred, actually, isn't it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the only thing that's difficult for me is I've never known Michael Caine, and probably very few people have, of similar age and even your age, not that you're that much older than me, who don't know Michael Caine as a bit of a caricature of himself.
Yeah.
You know, you accept it because it's Michael Caine. I think anybody else with some of the things that kind of comes out with, you'd be like, what are you going on about? He was given a ruby the size of a tangerine. You know,
tangerine. Yeah. Some people just want to watch the world burn.
And it would have been interesting had, you know, a different actor in that role. What, you know, I kind of look at it and go, he is Alfred for me. There is kind of no other Alfred. Yeah. And so it's very difficult to see any other depiction of it. But I'm always interested, you know, Jeremy Irons in...
Jeremy Irons is pretty good, actually, to be fair. I
don't even want to say the name of the film he was in.
Less said about that, the better. Jeremy Irons actually is a really good choice. I think Jeremy Irons did a really good job in that movie, to be fair.
Also, Andy Serkis in The Batman, I think, is a fairly decent choice as well. Yeah. But, you know, so I can see why, again, it's that thing of like, because it's Michael Caine, it means you automatically accept it straight away. So you don't necessarily have to do much with it. I think when it's a different actor in that role, you've got to work a bit more. And, you know, there are very few actors who kind of, their reputation precedes them. And you've got two of them here. You've got Michael Caine, you've got Morgan Freeman, where you kind of, almost like the Joker, they're absolutes. You don't need to question anything, you know. Yeah. And I think very shrewdly the script knows that about both of those characters, in the sense of they say things where you don't need to look too much into it. You just accept it at face value.
Yeah, well, you bring the pedigree of someone like Michael Caine, who could possibly be in charge of Batman, Michael Caine. And on a subconscious level, as the audience, you accept that, don't you? In a way that you might not accept it from an actor, say you didn't even know, so, an unknown actor, doesn't work in the same way. It's that subconscious. That's Carter giving him advice. You want to listen, you know what I mean? He's been in movies since before I was born, sort of thing. You know,
now not a lot of people know that.
We're still going to get a bit Rob Brydon in a minute, innit?
You're not doing it right.
You go slow and you go...
You don't do the broken voice. I'm not going to bury another Batman. How many Batmans has there been? I think there's so much about this film that is... it opens the door to so many different things that it's kind of very difficult to not go off into different tangents and to focus on it, because there's, as I say, there's just so many kind of strands. And one thing that I kind of picked up on this that I don't think any superhero film had done previous, even, you know, Burton's Batman, and to the same extent, and I know people will probably argue Avengers Endgame, there isn't a film that puts the stakes up so quickly, so high, and manages to make you want to know how the hell is Batman going to overcome this. It's very much a case of you care about these characters, not necessarily in a deep way, but you go, how is he going to get out of this? Because the stakes are so high. And the fact of the matter is with this is that he fails. Yeah. Batman fails. How many films in its own film that isn't necessarily setting it up for the next film have Batman fail? Yeah. Or not even necessarily Batman, but have the villain fail. Usually it's a case of a bit like Infinity War, in the sense of that's part one. This isn't the end of the story. You know, at that point, I think they probably had an idea they were going to make a third one, certainly after they saw the figures.
Yeah, I should think so.
But at that point, it's almost a thing of, if we get a third one, great. If we don't, this sits and stands alone. And it does, because you've left with a point where you go, Batman lost. Yeah, okay, he got the Joker in the end, but he lost Harvey Dent, the White Knight. Yeah. They lost Rachel Dawes.
He lost the soul of Gotham.
They lost Batman. You know, Batman. At this point, we're thinking, Batman's like, what, you can't go from that. Yeah, you know, you can't jump anywhere.
I find myself invested way more in this film than I do in any of the Marvel movies when I'm watching it. The stakes feel higher. It's the Joker is a villain. Everything he does is very unpredictable. So, like you say, that the stakes get raised. The stakes rise really quickly and in a really unpredictable manner. The pure chaos of it. You think, and this, what I find interesting about this movie is, like, obviously this is like the Heath Ledger movie. It just has to be, you know. He's not in it a great deal. When you really think about the screen time of the Joker, and this was so interesting about this movie, is he manages to steal the movie with very little screen time. And the movie has all these other plots going on. I mean, we haven't got to the plot yet, have we? But it has all these other plots going on. He's in China. He's taking down the mob. He wants to hang up his suit and hand it all over to the DA, to Harvey Dent. Oh, also the Joker's in this movie, you know, and eventually you get to Two-Face. But it doesn't feel like the Joker's not in this movie much. It feels like the Joker's movie, because in amongst all of that chaos is the Joker pulling strings one step ahead constantly throughout the movie. And then when he turns up, chews the scenery up, you know, in the greatest possible way, you know.
Stills the show. And you know, you mentioned plot. So for those who haven't seen the film, I'd be asking, what are you doing? Why have you not seen this film? But essentially, we follow Batman after the events of Batman Begins, and Gotham has got to a point where they don't really need the Batman quite as much as they did in the first movie, to the point where you've got vigilantes mimicking him. And then we hear about this Joker character who was introduced in the very final moments of the last film, not in a post-credits scene. You can go home when the credits roll.
Yeah.
And very, very quickly, immediately in the film, that's what we kind of start with. There's chaos. And it's Batman trying to deal with this chaos.
Yeah, trying to bring order to chaos. Yeah, that's right. From the very get-go of the movie, yeah.
And, you know, one after another, he fails. At every opportunity, he fails. he goes to reveal himself. He fails at that because Dent gets in the way, and they have a plan. But Joker's got another plan that's already superseded your one.
Yeah.
And it's, it's a very...
Tries to rescue Rachel, fails,
I've heard interviews and read articles where Nolan says that a big influence on this film was the film Heat, Michael Mann's.
Yeah.
Which I can see, but this takes it to another level. I can remember I saw Heat after I saw this. Bad move, because I think Heat is quite boring.
In comparison to this, it's a different movie. Yeah.
If I'd have seen it before I saw this, I'd probably be saying not the same for The Dark Knight, but I'd certainly be saying Heat, great film.
Yeah, I love Heat. I think it is a great movie, but it's not the same movie as if you're expecting. I think I'm going to see the threads that Nolan picked up to make Dark Knight. You're not going to see that from Heat. I think it's great. Val Kilmer and De Niro, right? Val Kilmer,
De Niro, Pacino.
Pacino, of course, yeah.
She's got a great ass.
Yeah, that was the big movie that put
De Niro and Pacino,
the two greatest actors, and that scene is amazing. It is slow, but that scene when they're trying to outact each other in that canteen is the stuff of legend, isn't it? It's been a long time since I've seen it. I'm sure it's a great movie. Yeah, I don't see the similarities, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
I can understand how Christopher Nolan would say that was a touch point for me, a jumping off point, if you like.
I think I can see the strands in the, that opening sequence. The heist is it's a condensed version of the heist in Heat.
Yeah,
but I can remember thinking as soon as I read, that's what he used as a bit of an influence, I thought, let's go watch Heat. And I went and watched it, and I was a bit disappointed, but that's kind of where he's used, that's kind of been a bit of an influence on that. And again, I think it's not a lot of films can have a 2 hour and 24 minute runtime, and one, it not feel like 2 hours and 24 minutes, and two, have a fast pace. Beat for beat, there's not really any point where you're going, can we get on to the next thing? Do we need to see any more of this? There's no point where you're getting to that stage. Everything has its place. Nothing feels too long. Nothing feels too short, even. There's not bits where you go, oh, that kind of jumped a bit or whatever. And that's really hard to have a good pace throughout that runtime. Yeah,
there's nothing, when you watch it, it's like you say, there's nothing you're thinking, I could live without this. What is this doing in the movie? Doesn't exist, does it? As like we're saying, not all movies can be told in an hour and 40. Some need 2.5, 3 hours. Very few, to be fair, need 2.5, 3 hours. But this movie does. There's a lot in it. Like you say, the plot it's very dense. So it's a lot of failing on Batman's part, and a lot of getting lectured by Alfred. Like you say, it's Michael Caine, so you take it, don't you?
Life lessons for me, Matthew McConaughey. Come with me if you want to live. Life lesson number 302. Y'all gonna need bigger boat.
Good evening and welcome to Inside the Actor's Mind, the show that delves deep into the psyche to find out what makes a great character, a great performance, and what makes a great actor. I am Julius Oxbridge Teeth III. Join me as we go deep into the actor's mind. I'm Julius Oxbridge Teeth III. Won't you join me next week as we go deep into the actor's mind?
So, favourite scenes, I think.
Anything with Heath Ledger in it, you know.
It's difficult to nail down a scene because there's, again, we've probably got to that point now where we've seen it so much that you kind of, I think we made a couple of comments like, I swear this bit was a bit longer.
Yeah.
But it's probably our own memories of going, I love that so much, and it is actually a lot longer. And you look at it and you go, oh, it's not that long at all. It's very kind of...
Yeah, very short.
Yeah, again, that pace is it. I think for me, probably my favourite scene has to probably be when the Joker first walks into the henchman, and you know they want to see a magic trick.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I watched it, and it was almost I remember thinking, where the f*** did that pencil go? Jesus Christ, you know. And then again, you're just every time you see him, you're totally mesmerised by every little thing that he does.
Everything. Heath Ledger in this movie is obviously amazing, and there's like there's the bit when he sits down in the hospital with Harvey Dent, and he looks at him and he's like, "Sorry." It's just like it's so well done. Sorry about that.
And, you know, I think this film sets a lot of bad trends. And it's not the fault of the film. I think it's because it's so successful, people think, let's do that again. So, you know, there's a lot of trend. You know, the trend at the moment is let's keep having the Joker, because the Joker's really successful now. Not that he wasn't before, but now it's like, let's do the Joker again. And so we've had 3-4 more iterations of the same character again.
Well, we had since Leto, and Phoenix.
Joaquin Phoenix. It looks like we're going to get Barry Keoghan. In the net, we saw him a little bit at the end of the Batman. And I'm kind of at the point now where I'm like, don't need to see another Joker.
Well, they were always very disappointing. That's the problem.
You're always trying to live up to that kind of expectation.
What really annoys me is when they try and turn other villains into Joker light. You know,
that was one of my biggest drawbacks from the Batman is the Riddler.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, the whole playing a cat and mouse game and it's a detective film almost.
Yeah.
Like that part.
Yeah.
As soon as he gets to having conversations with him, it's like, oh, you're just doing the Joker. You know, and it's like one of the drawbacks of... there are many drawbacks in Batman versus Superman, but
Martha.
If anybody watches that film and thinks Martha is a good name to name your child, you're sorely mistaken. You know, nothing against anybody who's called Martha, but your name will always be soured for me now. But Lex Luthor in that by Jesse Eisenberg. Eisenberg. He played that like the Joker.
Yeah, really overacting.
Bit maniacal,
really
bit. You know, poor man's Joker laugh.
Yeah. Should have played him like Elon Musk, would have been much better.
Yeah. Wait, you know, and then you hear castings about that and like Bryan Cranston as a Lex Luthor. Oh, yes, please. That'd be great. But they went, you know, they've tried to kind of follow that. Let's have an absolute psychopath as our villain, and let's have him crazy and unpredictable. And the problem is when you try to be crazy and unpredictable, it's usually quite predictable.
Yeah. It's like that person you work with who's like, I'm a bit crazy.
Yeah.
And you're like no, you're not.
Sometimes I put the milk in first.
Yeah.
You know. And, you know, in terms of bad trends.
It's like they decided, like, this is the Batman, right? This is his character. who does he play best against? Absolute lunacy. Well, we can't keep putting the Joker in the film. But, you know, the Riddler, he could be like the Joker. Whoever can be. Lex Luthor, he could be a bit like the Joker. Ham it up a bit, go for it. And it's like, not every movie needs to be the same movie. And I think, I don't think this is a particularly controversial opinion to have, that
Brace yourselves.
that they seem lost. Since Nolan left, they seem lost. They can't pull their together to make a decent Batman movie. There's elements that the Batman, there's elements of that that are great. You know, Andy Serkis is great in that. The fact that he's doing detecting is great. You know, don't even mind Robert Pattinson.
Not the liquid metal Terminator. That would have been an interesting film.
Been good. Yeah,
Robert Pattinson.
I didn't even mind Robert Pattinson. The internet got upset like it always does, and I'm like, I'm sure it'll be all right. You know,
I think there's a lot of elements to like in the Batman, but I think the problem it has is, again, talking about trends. Dark Knight trilogy put it in a very real, I'm not going to say dark. I know the words in two of the film's titles, but it's not necessarily dark. It's just based entirely in realism. It's totally, entirely believable.
How would this work in real life?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's been misinterpreted as being, it's a dark franchise. And so they've taken elements of that and put it into the Batman, and now it's really dark. And actually it's a point where it's like, it's a bit too dark. Like, I can remember thinking there wasn't any element of fun in the Batman. I'm sure there was, but I can't really remember any jokes. And there's some really good jokes in The Dark Knight where it's kind of, again, you've got that Michael Caine character who kind of just
the interplay between Caine and Bale, or rather, Bruce Wayne and Alfred. That's where the humor is, and that's where it mostly stays. There's not many jokes cracked while he's in the suit, but I mean, that's the problem. Batman is traditionally dark. I mean, in the movies anyway. The comics change. If you look at the Batman in the 80s, he's like James Bond in a cape. That's the Batman I grew up with as a kid, and then you get to the late 80s with the Frank Miller iterations, and it gets darker and darker. And I like the darker ones. And you get to the Batfleck. I'm one of the few people that didn't hate Ben Affleck as Batman, didn't like the movies he was in. I don't think it's his fault, though. And everyone said
it's entirely Zack Snyder's fault.
It's 100% Zack Snyder's fault. It's not. Affleck's perfectly serviceable as Bruce Wayne, as a moody, grumpy Bruce Wayne. It's not that bad. The movies are terrible, though. And everyone said there's no humor in this. So then they tried to force humor into them when you get to the Justice League, and it doesn't work. And it's like, you have to decide what you're doing here. And then everyone said, oh, well, now we're going to do the Snyder cut of Justice League. That's 4 hours long, was it? I mean, I've seen it. I can't remember anything about it. It's that dull.
Which for a 4-hour film is saying something.
Yeah, it's so dull. And it was interesting. It was interesting to see the difference, kinda. I didn't need to see it. I don't need you to inject humor into Batman. It's like the Nolan ones do it perfectly. There's jokes throughout. There's little peppered throughout it, but it's not forced, which is what you get to later on. And then they go, oh, well, that hasn't worked. So let's just, the Joker movie, we'll throw that out, real cheap, low budget movies, see what it does. Oh, right, people do like it dark. Let's make the next one dark again. It's like, can you just have a singular vision and execute it? That's all you need to do. And these people are supposed to be professional filmmakers, and they can't get it right. Nolan literally showed them, here's the blueprint. No, I'm not saying you can't keep remaking those same movies, especially not now, 2008, 15 odd years later. You can't make The Dark Knight now. It would have to be a different movie, But he showed them how it was done, and they still can't get it right. Even keeping him on as an executive producer for the Snyderverse, which I don't know how involved he was with it. Part of me thinks it might have just been a way to give him more money, I think producer roles often are.
Of his
contract.
No, well, probably there's probably an element of going, well, we trust Nolan, let's put him on it so that he can kind of not oversee it, but kind of almost have a bit of a stamp of approval. Obviously, I'm just purely speculating now. One of the things I think is to the detriment of any comic book movie that kind of comes out now is that it's made by people who love comics, which is why this film doesn't work. Why this film works perfectly, because it obviously they've used comics and they've looked into the lore and that, but it's not made for a comic book fan, and that's what makes it great, because it's suddenly, you need to have watched the previous film, but it's not filled with references where the only enjoyment you'll get is if you've read comic book 93 of this franchise and it's mentioned it's not filled with those things. It has elements of that in there, but it's almost, because it's made to appeal to a mainstream audience as opposed to a comic book audience. It encapsulates everything we like about comic book films, the lore, the history, the characters, and the, those types of things. But it takes everything that we like from big budget action films and goes, let's put the two together. Yeah.
I think where DC, I don't know if they've changed course now, but Marvel, obviously, everyone in the MCU high up they use comic book writers. They have the people in charge came from the comic books. They know the material and they know what works. They know what the fans want to see, because they've managed to take the cinematic fans along the same journey. And I know Warner Brothers and DC particularly don't follow that path. They have, you're the comic book people, we're the movie people, we'll make the movies. You're the TV people, you make the TVs. Us as experts know how to make a Batman movie, and they don't. And at this point, I actually think the opposite of what you're saying. I think they need to bring the comic book people in just because they need to do something else, whatever it is. Like, so Zack Snyder, I think your point you're making is Zack Snyder is a comic book geek. He knows the comic books inside out. Doesn't serve him well here, In the right hands, it could be done. Whatever they're doing with the Batman movies at the moment isn't working. It hasn't worked since Nolan left. Then, like I said, there's elements in all of the films that I like. So like even Batman v Superman, the extended Blu-ray fight scene in the warehouse is phenomenal. It's probably less than 5 minutes of the whole film, though, but that is so good. That's the one thing they get right in that movie.
I kind of think the only difference between the Marvel universe and the DC universe is that, they've got one particular vision in the Marvel universe, but more importantly, they've got one guy who kind of knows what he wants and knows what needs to serve that. And again, that's not perfect. There's a lot of films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that are entirely forgettable. And I've seen probably all of them, barring I think Black Panther, the newest one. And there are some which I think they're all enjoyable. There's not one that I hate or dislike, but they are. I go and watch them with my wife, and I come out of there and I have to explain shit to her.
Oh, right.
Because she goes, I don't get that bit. I don't. Who's that? What's this? And it's all. And again, I don't know everything at all. I'm know by a comic book fan in the sense of knowing everything. I know bits and bobs, and and so I wonder what it's like for somebody who doesn't know anything, like my wife, or like somebody who just wants to go and see a film and going, well, what is all of this? Why do I
have to have seen 8 films before this to understand?
Do I need to know exactly, again, the backstory of this character to understand why they're doing what they're doing or anything? And I think in most instances, you kind of do. You kind of need to know all of that.
I think on one hand, it's great that we live in a time where you have these Marvel movies that you basically have How many films have they done now? I'm going to say 20. I don't.
I think it's close to 50. I reckon.
Really? So there you go. And they're all kind of interlinked. I mean, that to me is fascinating. It is a problem if you just want to go watch a movie. You know, a 3-movie trilogy is enough. Like you say, you don't have to have seen The Batman Begins to enjoy The Dark Knight. The Batman Begins. Don't have to have seen Batman Begins.
Have you seen that? The Batman Begins.
Have you heard the new rapper music?
I have, and I like it.
Yeah, you don't have to have seen it, but it helps. It makes a lot of sense. I think by the time you get to Dark Knight Rises, you need to have seen the other 2 movies, at least the second.
Yeah,
I mean, you bring in Ra's al Ghul elements of that again, so it's all sort of tied up.
It kind of makes sense because it's the ending of a story.
But could you imagine if Christopher Nolan was like, okay, now I'm gonna expand this universe out. We're gonna do the Green Arrow movies or the Green Lantern movies. But you have to have seen the 3 Batman movies and the 3 Green Lantern movies and the 4 Robin movies. And at a certain point, I would lose interest. But that's just speaking for me personally.
I think it's inevitable. And just going back to the point I was making, I think the only difference between the Marvel universe and the DC universe is they've got one guy at the top who kind of not necessarily knows what to do and knows his stuff, but just has a singular thing. I think they haven't necessarily... They may have done, but it hasn't exactly been clear.
They were trying... Snyder was going to be that guy, wasn't
And so what they've done is they've now got James Gunn in that position, who done Guardians of the Galaxy and The Suicide Squad, the good one. But elements of that is that they've hired people. They got lucky with... Well, it wasn't even a thing then, but they kind of... Whoever hired Nolan and said, you're going to do they got lucky. They got really lucky that if you look at all of Nolan's films, he doesn't regurgitate films. It takes him 3 or 4 years. You know, he's been around since 2000, and in that time, so in 23 years, he's done less than 10 films. You know, it's not going to be, I made 3 films that come out, I'll do another one and I'll do another 3. He spends time on things. Yeah. And unfortunately, I've never been a fan of Zack Snyder. I mean, his films will look good. They'll always look appealing.
They are always
and they're always visually striking. Yeah, but beyond that, there's nothing.
His storytelling is not great. His films are amazing. I actually one of the people that liked Watchmen. I think Watchmen's a good movie. It's very long. It's not, by no means, it's not a perfect movie.
I think a lot of that came from the fact of he had that source material there. So I don't think there's I certainly can't think of it. Maybe I don't think he's done a film that is purely original work. I think it's always been based on something. I know he done Dawn of the Dead in 2004. Based on, obviously, George A. Romero's. Sucker Punch, I think, was based on
Snyder, was it?
I've not seen it, but I know it's based on a comic. Watchmen, based on a comic. Then goes into the DC universe and starts doing those things. 300 was based on a comic. You know? Yeah. So that tells you a lot about his, you know, not necessarily that he claims to be a writer, but I mean, I think he's written elements of all of the films that he's
kind of... be an adaptive writer at that point.
So that tells you a lot about his, you know, he obviously uses that set as a bit of a safety net in the sense of these are already grounded in something. I haven't got to build this up from scratch. Yeah. And so I can remember when Man of Steel came out and the thing that drew me to that was it executive produced by Chris Nolan, and they tried to do what they done with Batman, and they put Superman in a very real universe, and it wasn't bad, it wasn't great, it was solid.
It was better than Singer's Superman, wasn't it? Was it Brandon Routh?
Yeah. Superman was very much in a similar position to Batman was a couple of years previous, in the sense of people had kind of weaned them off. Their hands had been burnt. And the thing,
is it going to have kryptonite in this one?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's you have, in order to have Superman be, for me anyway, I know people there are lots of people who love Superman, but for me, he'll always be the most flawed character in the DC universe, because you know exactly what his weakness is, and it's the same every time. Oh, it's kryptonite, but in a gun form. Now it's kryptonite on the end of a spike. It's exactly the same things all the time. And so
here's someone else from Krypton who's slightly bigger than him. You know,
exactly. And I can remember when there was talk about Batman v Superman, and I remember thinking, okay, and I looked at it, it's going to be Zack Snyder, and I thought, okay, the problem isn't going to be visually, it's going to look good. There's going to be element, you know, the fight, as you say, the fight sequence is good. The problem is going to be the story. And what's the problem in Batman v Superman? The story. And I think,
and Martha.
It's just such a bad way to end a good fight scene, and to just suddenly
I was mostly really excited to see what they call the Fat Bat suit, you know, Fat Bat, which is the suit he wears, because it's from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. And I was like, they're going to put him in this suit. They have to. Like, Snyder knows the source material well enough. And obviously it's not directly Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. There's elements of it, the fight with Superman, but they're a completely different storyline. Funnily enough, they did an animated version, parts 1 and 2 of Dark Knight Returns, that is outstanding. So much better than Batman v Superman anyway, you know. And
I think a lot of the problem that they're still facing is that we're probably now not in that position, because the Batman came out and it was quite widely positively received, is that you're still seeing the effects of the Dark Knight in Batman, in the sense of, it doesn't really matter what the story is, doesn't really matter about anything. People will pay to go and see Batman because of the Dark Knight, because of that trilogy.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a bit like, remember how you were saying before a while ago about how Terminator 2 killed the franchise? I kind of feel like the Dark Knight trilogy is such a high standard. I don't know if they'll ever be able to get past it. Which
is why you kind of have to do something different. And I think, luckily, again, I think it's, you know, I don't think it's as good as The Dark Knight, but The Dark Knight Rises, I think, is a great way to end. And I know a lot of people have some very big problems with it. But I think the reason for me why it works is because Nolan didn't go, well, the Joker worked, let's do that again, but differently. He went, okay, so he tackled the mind of Batman in Batman Begins. We tackled the kind of
moral choices
about the heart of Batman.
Yeah.
And then in the third one, they went, now let's attack the body.
Let's physically break him. Yeah.
And brilliantly with Tom Hardy. I almost called him Tom Bane. Tom Hardy is Bane. And I think, interestingly, I was saying about bad trends, one of the things which I until we just watched it, I never really got, and I don't think it's not a problem, but the Batman voice by Bale, I always used to defend it and go, well, it makes sense. It makes sense for me because it's this guy and it's menacing, and if somebody's screaming at you like that, again, from the story they told in the first one, and the reason he's the Batman is because it's about fear. It makes sense. Yeah. What I didn't quite realise and didn't quite remember is the way he carries that on into, not in those big aggressive moments where, you know, the interrogation scene, for example, or when they're outside and he's with the Joker, but it's in the scenes where he's speaking to people quite conversationally in that same voice, and it's
jarring.
I don't think it goes over the top in this.
No,
I think there's like one scene where Joker's hanging upside down, and he says something, and I remember just thinking, sorry, what did you say? Because it was almost unintelligible.
Yeah.
Interestingly, it wasn't apparently in the first edit of it. Christian Bale is toned down a lot. His actual performance was a lot toned down, and Nolan dialed it up to what we eventually saw.
Is that right?
So it's interesting because I think a lot of people lay Christian Bale's, and I think, some of the blame to that has to be kind of labelled at Nolan's thing. And in terms what I was saying about bad trends, sorry to harper on a bit, but we kind of almost see that again with Bane in that we've got another interesting voice choice. I think it's great.
I love it.
But I can see why people think it's utterly ridiculous.
They're idiots. It's brilliant.
Yeah. It's,
I mean, the thing with I mean, me and you have been having this conversation about Batman's voice for 15 years now, I think.
And we always have the same stance. I'm going, it's great. What are you going on about?
I'm like, it's too much. I don't hate it. It doesn't ruin the movies for me. Funnily enough, I know exactly the bit you're talking about when he's talking to the Joker at the end, and he's still really doing that. You better than everyone, and you were wrong. It's like, I think you could dial it back in that instance. And what's interesting is most of the criticism that gets leveled about it is when people say Nolan should have told him to dial it back. And what you're saying is it was the complete opposite, and Nolan said, I want more, which I never knew that. That's fascinating. As for the Bane voice, it's brilliant. Apparently they had to re-edit it though after I don't think the film was out. I think it must have been a test screening, and they're like, it was unintelligible. And so they've messed around with the sound level. So I think it sounds great. I think Tom Hardy's Bane voice is one of those things that's brilliant. People who, I don't have a problem with Dark Knight Rises. I don't understand why people do. It is a great way to end the franchise. You're not getting the Joker back. It's not happening. You know what I mean? It can't be done for obvious reasons. And like I said, when I first heard, he's doing Bane, and everyone went, ugh. I think at that point, people just wanted to hate the movie. Some people, not all people, But again, it's that thing about trusting Nolan. At every point, even when you found out he was doing the bat bike in the second movie, you're like, really? We're going to have Heath Ledger and the bat bike? You did so well on the first film, why spoil it? And then you see the movie, you're like, oh, he made the bat bike cool, but the bat bike isn't corny. That's amazing. So by the time you get to the third movie, you trust the director, like we keep saying. And Dark Knight Rises is a great movie. I can't think of a single problem with it, really. I mean, everyone harkens on about the end, don't they? Like, how did he get out? Oh, they telegraphed that. Oh, the autopilot doesn't work and all of that stuff. Well, what do you want?
Whenever I've heard that criticism, I've always gone, it's Batman. Like,
yeah. How much realism can you demand of this film?
Like, the reason why again, I think it's kind of the same when you get any film which is so revered. If you get a sequel to it, or a remake, or a reimagining, or anything in that same vein, people go into it with expectations. And when you go into it with expectations, it's never going to reach them.
No.
So I went into The Dark Knight Rises and I went, it's not going to be The Dark Knight. And because I done that, I remember coming out and going, it's better than The Dark Knight. And I remember the next morning going, it wasn't better than The Dark Knight. But
I was expecting it to be so much worse. Yeah.
And because I didn't have those expectations, same thing with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the third act.
Same year as this movie.
Bit of a twitch.
Yeah. I think that's.
But I went into that going, I know it's not going to be the first one. I know it's not even going to be the second one, and I know it's definitely not going to be the third one. So I enjoyed it, and I think that's what what's really difficult. Is to, ironically, that's the thing I didn't do with Terminator Genesis. I kind of went, it looks like 2. It's going to be great.
That must have been disappointing.
Salvation, I went into that going, this isn't going to be a Terminator film.
Yeah.
And therefore,
I
liked it.
Yeah, I like Salvation.
A lot of people, it's really easy to kind of go in and go, I want it to be as good as the best thing in that franchise or the best thing about that type of movie. And very often it's not. And so I think that's probably where I think a lot of the criticisms come from. And one thing I pointed out when we were watching it is that the criticisms that people have of The Dark Knight Rises, those same criticisms can be put in The Dark Knight, but nobody ever levels them at The Dark Knight because it's The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
So they point it, how did Batman get out of there? How did the Joker put all those bombs on the boats? It's exactly the same type of thing. Oh, he paid. Yeah, you have to start explaining it, just like you have to start explaining the Batman.
There's certain questions you don't need to ask of a movie.
Yeah, how
of a
did
man
Batman
dressed
get
up in a
back
rubber
to, how did
rubber
Batman
batsuit?
get back to Gotham after climbing out of that thing with a broken back?
Yeah. The only thing I don't like about the end of that movie is I think you actually see him drinking coffee at the end, and it would have just stylistically, I think we can all agree, would have been better if Michael Caine had looked up and it cut. I personally don't think you need to see Bruce Wayne still alive. I think it would have been much better because we all know he's still alive. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
you don't need to label it, but it's such a small criticism. I don't get to that bit of the movie and go, that's it, throw my popcorn down and go on the internet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this, like The Dark Knight Rises is a great movie, and I don't understand anyone who doesn't like it. How do you end a franchise? That's how you end a franchise. It's brilliant. And interestingly enough, much like Snyder, some of that material is drawn from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, but in capable hands.
That's everything it is. And it's so, again, I think part of the problem is that as soon as you become kind of successful, so Nolan's got to a stage now where he's very capable and he's very successful. And now people are starting to hate on those Nolan tropes, shall we say. Yeah. So one thing, we mentioned it earlier, but we haven't really touched upon it, and it's kind of a shame, but we will touch upon it now, is the fact of Hans Zimmer's score. Those tones that are used, those high pitched kind of eerie scraping metal sounds. And then those low kind of droning notes. Yeah. Those have become cliche now. How many films have you seen that aren't Hans Zimmer that do that, and to lesser effect?
So many.
It's become even to the point now where you see it in, Inception came 2 years later, and I think uses those lower tones in a, I'm not going to say better way.
It's just
in a slightly different way and for different purposes.
Yeah.
And so, but by the time you get to probably The Dark Knight Rises, certainly by the time you get to Interstellar, certainly by the time you get to Tenet, Dunkirk and those things, Hans Zimmer's kind of had to change what those kinds of things are. And rightly so, for the purposes of what film he's doing. It's not going to be applicable to just do that thing again. But
he also can't do it anymore, though, can he? That's right.
Yeah, shrewd enough to know, particularly Interstellar, which I think is easily... I think it's easily the most accomplished soundtrack of a film ever, in the sense of it does exactly what it needs to do for that film. In lesser hands, with a director who isn't quite as established in what he wants, would have just done the same again, and so it becomes a very different, or has a different atmosphere because of that music.
Yeah, I mean no disrespect when I say this, John Williams, right? Okay. You know a John Williams score when you hear it.
And a good example of John Williams is, if everybody now in their heads, a little tester, a little bit experiment for you, hum the theme tune in your head to Superman. And now try and think of Indiana Jones or Star Wars.
I think me and you have had this conversation before.
You can't do it.
Really
it all becomes kind of one.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's probably through time and through, those same kind of tropes. But I think...
But I mean, you're talking like Lucas and Spielberg is their go-to composer. Now, I'm sure there's people that have a problem with that, but not in the same way as people have a problem with Zimmer's scores, but they all sound the same. It's like, well, they don't anymore. I understand why you say that. He had a thing he was doing that everyone copied.
I don't think Zimmer... I think Zimmer done it probably once. The things that everybody says, Zimmer does it all the time. Yeah. I think he does it once. He does it in The Dark Knight, and I think it's all those lesser inferior copies that kind of get amalgamated into one, whereby you hear it and you think, that must be a Zimmer score because it sounds so much like it. It's almost like, how is that not copyright? Because it's something...
I know you've seen it, but Hannibal, the movie, he wrote the music, the opera.
Yeah.
That's Zimmer. And that's a beautiful piece of music.
And the thing is, as well, is that he's prolific before this point.
Yeah. Well, he also wrote the Going for Gold theme tune, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
He did. Yeah.
Going for gold.
He also happens to be in the music video. That was the first music video that was on MTV because he was
the
Buggles video killed the radio star. He was in the band. He's the guy in the leather jacket playing the keys. It's Hans Zimmer.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so a nice little bit of trivia fact there. But he got to a point where his scores were of a certain type. Not sounds the same by any stretch, but of a certain kind of ilk, And he does this one thing in The Dark Knight. Batman Begins doesn't really have this. It's similar in tone, but it doesn't have that kind of dun dun, that kind of, and then the scratching metal. It doesn't. It fits. I
honestly can't remember.
You could put the music of Batman Begins over the top of The Dark Knight, and it would work. But he doesn't do that. He didn't go, I'll just do the same thing again because it's the same thing. He kind of went a bit different. And I think The Dark Knight Rises, he went a slightly different again with the kind of like the almost the choral sort of kind of singing and the chanting that he has in that bit when he's trying
the Bane theme tune.
Yeah. So it goes in a different direction again. And so a lot of people level the criticism of Hans Zimmer through the fact of he's been copied so much, and it's actually not his fault. Again, if you listen to Interstellar, you listen to Inception, which is probably the most similar to The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises in tone, but time for me is probably the single greatest soundtrack piece of all time for me. I know it's been overdone. It's used on so much now, much like anything. It's used on adverts, any moment of whatever. But for me, it's always been. But again, it's set up that bad trope whereby now people are bored of it. Nobody wants to hear that kind of droning kind of, the Zimmer sound almost.
It's what happens when things are successful, though, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean? It's like when a band you like becomes hugely successful, and then you get 1001 similar sounding bands signed to record companies, and all of a sudden you have a movement, and all of a sudden it's crap. It's the same thing with movies. It gets overused, it gets overplayed, and you get bored of it real quick. And it's not Zimmer's fault,
And much like the criticisms that are levelled at Nolan now. So one thing is, I think we've touched upon it a little bit with sound. So obviously we mentioned that he made the choice to dial up the Batman voice. He obviously wanted the Bane voice to be dialed up, and they said, no, you can't. If anybody's watched Tenet, I think it's a great film, not at the same levels. It's certain, again, now I when I go into a Nolan film, I'm kind of trying not for it to be, I want it to be as good as The Dark Knight or for me, The Prestige. I know it's not, so I have to kind of I have to set my expectations at a certain level. But one of the criticisms of that is the sound in that you can't hear what they're saying through the majority of the film, especially when there's like big action sequences. It's a subtitle job at home.
Wow. That would drive me mad.
Yeah. So again, but I accepted it because of all the good faith he's kind of set up. I think he gets a lot of criticism about female characters, which I think this is probably where it started. We mentioned Rachel Dawes' character and how, although it has a lot of effect on the story, the character doesn't necessarily actively add anything. It's all kind of, she's in damsel in distress a little bit.
That's right. Yeah.
And whilst I don't think that's a bad thing for this, I think you can only have so much in there, and I think it just happens to be.
Well, she's Batman or Bruce Wayne's anchor.
Yeah.
Back to the real world, back to daylight, if you like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that character can only really have one function, and that's to fail.
But I think that's where the criticism started, in the sense of people saw that, and then it kind of happens similar again in Interstellar.
Well, you get to Dark Knight Rises, and you've got Talia al Ghul.
It happens a little bit in Inception. The female characters in that, I'm not going to say are bad, because I don't think they are. They're just not. They're not great, but they're solid, and they serve the function of the story. But it's not like you go, that is a great character, like you do, for Bane, or for Cobb or Ames in Inception, one of my favourite characters. So I could, and that's what I mean about bad trends, in that you're a victim of your own success.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, why sometimes it's almost better to have a cult following, because if things come out and, people hate it at the time, there's no expectation level, and then you go and watch it and you go, why does everybody hate that film? And you enjoy it more. Whereas unfortunately, if you talk to somebody who hasn't seen The Dark Knight, like what we're doing now, you'll go on for a 20-minute conversation at least why you need to go and watch The Dark Knight. So that person's expectations are always going to be at a fairly lofty stage. And I think fortunately, I think it's one of the few films that can live up to those expectations.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, yeah.
Terminator 2 probably being another one that can live up to those expectations. But there are very few where you build it to a certain point where you go, that's great. You've got to go and see that. So for example, The Godfather for me, hadn't seen it until about 5 years ago, and everybody had said it's one of the greatest films of all time. It's amazing. That's all I'd ever heard about it. I watched it and I was like, that's all right. Yeah,
but that's the problem. Things move on. Yeah. So, it's the Orson Welles film that everyone bangs on about, Rosebud. Citizen Kane.
Yes.
I finally got round to watching that. I mean, it would have been about 13 years ago, something like that.
Never seen
it. And I'm like, this is supposed to be the greatest film ever made. But the reason it's supposed to be the greatest film ever made is because it set a lot of standards. But it was made in the 50s. So I'm watching it going, it's all right. It's not my fault. It's 50 years later or something, 60 years later when I finally watch it. But that movie began, so many people say, that movie is set so many standards of movies that we now are just used to. They're the norm. They weren't the norm when he made it. So objectively, I can look at that movie and go, I see what you're saying. But practically, when I watch it, am I going to reach to watch that movie again? Sadly not, And that's probably a similar experience you're having with The Godfather. It's the 70s that was probably made, the first ones. I think. Yeah, really early. I think before the first Jaws movie, isn't it? Yeah, I think. So yeah, it's an old movie. I think they're great. But I saw them when I saw them when I was young enough. They probably weren't. Well, I would have seen them maybe the 90s. So they would have been old, but not so old. Do you know what I mean? And there hadn't been a lot of great gangster movies since The Godfather. Obviously, you got the Scorsese movies.
Goodfellas.
Yeah, fucking amazing. Goodfellas, a great movie. Yeah, I mean, but so Godfather, will always like The Godfather. They are very long movies, though.
I think it says a lot about our discussion on The Dark Knight. We haven't even spoken about Gary Oldman.
Gary Oldman.
I mean,
he's an old man.
He's not lost in this by any stretch.
No,
he's an integral part of it. But I think that kind of sums up how much there is, and we've not even scratched the surface, really.
True, yeah, and he's great in this movie.
I think Gary Oldman's one of those actors where he's not Gary Oldman in anything.
Oh, he's a character actor.
He's a character actor, but not of the traditional sense. In you get the character actors who are usually small parts and they're playing a certain role, whereas he's the character actor, almost in the same vein as can't I think of his name? Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, where
it's totally okay. That's a bit more extreme, but he kind of encompasses everything to do with the character, and he, you do
almost cease to see Gary Oldman in many of his roles.
And this one is a prime example. You see Commissioner Gordon. Yeah. It's a believable.
I mean, at the time, off the top of my head, Gary Oldman as a non-villainous kind of character it's I wouldn't say it's against type, but it's not who you thought of Gary Oldman. Gary Oldman plays villains, twisted type people, dark characters, and he brings an element of that to Jim Gordon. To be fair, Jim Gordon is not a two-dimensional character in Gary Oldman's hands. He's very well fleshed out, and he plays conflicted and flawed and noble all in one go. He's literally like that public servant. He's almost like, he reminds me, he's like playing him like a football manager, but he's a cop in the worst city in America, you know what I mean? Yeah. But he's like, well, this is my team. That's my forwards. That's my centre backs. That's my goal. And it's like he's shuffling the bad cards he's dealt as well as he can, you know? And Gary Oldman plays that extremely well, and I would say almost against type at this point when he comes into this franchise, you know.
Well, I think it got him at the right time, in the sense of when you're so good at playing bad characters, there's only so long before people start to like you as an actor, and so therefore playing bad characters becomes more and more difficult because you're likable. It's a bit, you know, it's a bit like a wrestling analogy, in the sense of when the bad guy is so good at being a bad guy, eventually he starts getting cheered. Yeah. And that's the point where you go, he's now a good guy. And I think this is just at that, probably, around this time is when people started going, you know what, Gary Oldman is great. And not that anybody said he wasn't previous to that, but it's when people started really kind of going, you look back at his body of work and you go, he's got some absolute belters in there.
He's got some chops on him.
And as you say, it is against type, because it is that kind of, you know, that...
Yeah, he's everyone's dad in that movie.
Yeah, a very real... I think what's really interesting is when we were watching it, I think we both kind of made the joke of, in this film, where there's that point where he fakes his own death. We both made the joke about, and he didn't even tell his wife. And it's kind of funny. But now that we kind of look at it a bit more, I kind of go, that sums his character up perfectly, because it says he obviously loves his family, and he loves, you know, he loves them to death. But his sense of right and wrong and his sense of justice
and his sense of duty
is that powerful that he's willing to do that in order to get the bad guy. And that, you know, I think that's a very real thing. You know, I think there's probably a lot of, you know, real life police officers who have to kind of put themselves in that kind of position whereby you're risking your life to a certain extent a lot of the time. This is going in a very different direction. But, you know.
I think I should imagine being a policeman or a detective, especially in America, I should imagine probably comes at quite a great cost to your family life, you know, your home life. Probably same in this country. I don't know what it's like if you're a bobby on the street sort of thing. That comes with its own risks and dangers and stuff. But I would, without looking into it, I would imagine divorce rates for policemen are probably quite high. You know,
it's probably a safe bet to make.
Yeah. Superb actor, superb character. You know, and it could be played flat in a lesser director's hand, in a lesser actor's hands. You know, but he plays it very well. He brings that empathy and that soul of the struggling public servant. You know,
and it's almost across the board. I think obviously we've spoken about Rachel Dawes' character. Barring that character, every single character in there is is believable because their motivations and their kind the way in which they're in the story and their you know, the way they function the story is so on point, whereby the reason, obviously you can say, I'm going to put Batman in a real world. Easier said than done. How do you put a guy flying around a city dressed as a bat in the real world? Yeah. And it's because you go, we're not making a Batman movie, we're making a Bruce Wayne movie.
Yeah.
And Batman's the peripheral. Batman's the kind of, you know...
He's the window dressing.
Absolutely. And again, you know, Christian Bale, not that you ever needed to, you know... Christian Bale meant that you could have important, intelligent, real characters in a big budget action film. It wasn't just bang, bang, window dressing. Don't think about it for too much, because when you do, you'll dislike it. You actually, the more you think about Bruce Wayne as a character and Batman as a character, the more you kind of go, actually, yeah, there's some real depth to that, you know.
Touch of the Patrick Bateman's at times, his Bruce Wayne, inevitably so, you know. I mean, it's unavoidable. But yeah, it's great. I think a lot of people say the key is Bruce Wayne. The key into Batman is going through Bruce Wayne, you know. And Bale's great at that. One thing I really like in this movie as well is the changes they make to his suit. They do the traditional rubber Batman suit in the first film. And I've been saying for a long time, just put him in like army fatigues, but make them look like Batman suits. So I was thinking, I didn't quite go all the way they went, you know. And then you get to the second movie, and it's interesting. I forgot he starts off the movie in his same rubber suit, and I was like, it doesn't look good. You know, it's like I didn't really notice it too much in the first film. It looks good. He's got that big wide neck on him, but because in my head I'm expecting the Batman suit of the second movie, I'm watching those opening scenes. I'm like, I'm glad they changed the suit in this, because it looks great. He's like, I can't move in this suit. How do we get around it? And they design their way out of it in the movie. And it's brilliant.
And for those who don't know, the reason they came up with, you know, they were talking about, okay, what's the reasoning behind why Batman gets a new suit? And they went, well, let's just have it as the real reason. The reason why we're going to change the Batman suit from a filmmaking perspective is because it's really uncomfortable. It's really agile. It's really difficult to move in.
Yeah.
And we need something
if he
more
wants
agile.
To turn around, he has to move his entire body rather than just his head. You know,
it's the whole kind of the shoulders.
Yeah.
You go, you know. Yeah. And rather than, again, that could have been a really overcomplicated process where they go, let's have this really deep backstory into why he gets in. He goes, no, why does he get a new bat suit? So he can move. So he can move a bit quicker. He can, you know. And they set.
And it looks great.
Yeah, it's one of those. I think it's a really underrated one. I think a lot of people they like that, particularly the 89 Batman suit. And again, probably the Batman versus Superman suit they like because it's a bit different again. And I think everybody takes for granted Dark Knight and the Dark Knight,
Dark Knight suit. Yeah, and
I think that's a good segue into how much everybody takes for granted the Dark Knight.
Yeah, in
the sense of so many people have thought it's easy to do what's been done, which is why they've copied it, and then they've gone, no. Any superheroes as a whole movie have gone, not just Batman, they've gone, let's make it more serious. Logan was an example. Let's make it more serious. It done it well.
Yeah. Logan was chasing Deadpool in a way as well, wasn't it? That R-rated movie, which is great. It was really good. The Logan movie was really good to see Wolverine stabbing people in the head with his claws. I was like, I didn't realise how long I'd waited to see that until I saw it. You know what I mean? Like you say, when you do something well, it's easy for people to think it's easy to do well, and it's not. You know, and I think that kind of speaks to the legacy of the movie or the impact of the movie in a way. You know, like I was saying, how do you get past the Dark Knight trilogy? If you want to make another Batman film, can't really be done, can it? You know,
it's very difficult to, and I think it makes it look a lot easier than it is, and that's the testament to how good it is. Is that it makes people go, I can do that, and then you try and they can't. Yeah,
well, there you go. There's probably no greater testament to how good a movie it is, and the fact that every movie that they've made, every Batman movie they've made since, just doesn't touch it. And we're now talking about a movie that's 15 years old. When was the last one? So this was 2008. When was Dark Knight Rises? 11?
2012.
12. There
it's
you
11
go.
years old.
So 11 years since this franchise wrapped up, and they still haven't worked out how many movies has he been in, including
Batman vs Superman, Justice League. I think
the Batman.
The Batman. I think he's in The Flash as well. I've not seen that yet. But
there's a bunch of Batmans in that, isn't there? Yeah. So call it 3 solid Batman movies since, and a few cameos, if you like. And they still haven't worked it out. They can't get past it, which is great. It is a great testament for this film, but it's not good if you want to see another good Batman film, you know. But
I think part of the problem with that is that it's coming from why are we seeing another Batman film? What's the purpose? What
do you have to offer me?
The purpose is to make money. And I think as soon as that becomes the purpose, that a lot of the time is when it's
well, yeah, it would have been the purpose when they made the Nolan movies as well, though, right?
The reason to make money isn't enough of a thing to go, yeah, but it could be like Joel Schumacher's, so we could make money off it, but it's a risk. You know, so we've got to put some time and effort into it. Whereas I think since The Dark Knight, they've gone, we can do another Batman, mate. People will come and see it because it's Batman, myself included. I'll go and see it because it's Batman.
I will watch anything with Batman in it. It's funny enough. I used to read a lot of comics when I was younger, but now as an old man, the only comics I still buy are Batman comics, and it's the same with the movies. I know the comics are fine; they're not terrible mostly, you know. But the movies, like you say, I will go watch a Batman movie, you know, with very low expectations that are usually not met. You know what I mean? And the Batman was serviceable. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I was exhausted when I saw it in the cinema. I will watch it again. I saw the Joker movie once, and it was good. I haven't had zero desire to watch it again, though. I was like, it was good.
You get to a point where there's a burnout. You know, I think, okay, there was 9 years between. Well, hang on a minute, no, there was 7 years, wasn't there? 98, I think, was Clooney's Batman.
Oh, yeah, it's got to be late 90s. Yeah. It's good, 97, 98.
7 years. So actually, it's not too dissimilar from. We've got Batman v Superman 3 years later, so it's a lot shorter time. But even that in itself is a short amount of time. I think they need, you know, sometimes absence makes the heart grow fonder. Yeah. If you're seeing a Batman or a Joker or any of those characters that we love all the time, it's gonna be so difficult for us to go, well, we've seen it all before, you know, and often we've seen it done before better. So why am I going to watch this version? If we had, say, 10 years, even 15 years of not having a single Batman film or a single film about Joker or anything in that universe, by that point, people are going, I think it's time for a new. And by that point, you've got the trust where you can go, enough time has passed. Yeah. Let's not see the origins again, for Christ's sake. Yeah. But enough time has passed where you can tell a new story without it being necessarily immediately compared to something that happened not so long ago.
So it was really interesting when they cast Leto as Joker, and they released. Do you remember when they released the images of him with all his tattoos on his face and that? And everyone was like, and they went, "Well, that's not necessarily what he's going to look like," and it was. Yeah. And I was like, "Why don't you just own it?" You know what I mean? Jared Leto is a terrible human being. And I don't like him as the Joker. You know what I mean?
You know, the thing for me that told me immediately that it was going to be a bad depiction was the tattoo on his, I think it's on his forehead, damaged. It's like, Oh, thanks for telling
you need
us
to telegraph that.
You know,
Yeah,
it's like again treating its audience like they're silly. Like we need to be spoon-fed stuff. More often than not, the audience is intelligent. They can pick things up and probably pick things up you probably didn't even put down.
Well, it's that show Don't Tell Me. And he's literally got damage tattooed on his forehead. You know what I mean? Like, it's over at that point.
So I think we just need to let Batman kind of
let it rest.
Yeah. I do just want to kind of mention one thing which you haven't spoken about at all, and probably not go into masses of detail, because again, that's a whole podcast in and of itself. But obviously, we lost Kevin Conroy, who I think is probably, I'd say, probably the best Batman depiction.
Yeah, he's the voice of Batman.
Yeah. Like I can't hit anything else in an animated form. For my first interaction, again, came very shortly after The Dark Knight, where I played Arkham Asylum, the game, which is, of course, again, that
first Arkham Asylum game was amazing.
It's amazing because you're playing as Batman for one. You can't go wrong.
Punching turkeys in the neck.
Two,
you know what I mean?
They've got a great story in there and great performances. Mark Hamill's Joker. Kevin Conroy is Batman. But it has all of those things. A good game has those things that keep you coming back. And the thing that kept me coming back was they had these things called Riddler trophies where you could go and find them, and it would tell you bits about characters. It would give you a character bio, and I think anybody who's interested kind of peripherally about comics, which I would kind of consider myself in that, where I don't go and read the comics, but I quite like the idea of it. I feel quite overwhelmed of going, there's 80 years worth of Batman comics. Where do I begin? Yeah. That was a great way of it. It just showed, here's what you need to know about the Calendar Man. Not a massive character. I didn't know anything about him. That sounds cool. And all of these different, and I think part of the problem, again, with Batman films is they have the same 2 or 3, 4 or 5 villains, and it's usually the villains that were iconic in the 60s ones. You've got Joker, you've got Riddler, you've got Bane to a certain extent. We've seen that done a couple of times. You've got Two-Face, which are all the big ones, but there are characters. Scarecrow, again, in Batman Begins was a great choice, because I don't think hardly, apart from the people who really knew the comic books, nobody really knew who Scarecrow was.
Scarecrow and Ra's al Ghul.
It makes there's so much lore there, and part of the reason why that was such a good experience was because Kevin Conroy is Batman.
Yeah, he is the voice of Batman. Yeah,
and
well, obviously from the animated series for me, Kevin Conroy. That's who I hear in my head is Kevin Conroy's Batman.
And that as much as there's so many great. I think it's from the Dark Knight Returns, whereas I am the Knight, I am Batman. Excuse my very, very poor imitation. I'm not claiming to be Kevin Conroy's replacement by any means. But I think if you have a conversation about anything to do with Batman, you kind of have to at least have a nod and a mention. I think particularly so. Yeah. Now that we've sadly lost him, and I think part of the I would wonder what would have happened to the Joker character had Heath Ledger not passed away. I think that means we hold it in high regard, because
they didn't get an opportunity to mess it up. Yeah.
We're never going to be able to see another depiction of Heath Ledger doing that. Whereas you could see, even now, you could still see another Jack Nicholson version. And we've had how many versions of Jared Leto? We didn't need the first one. Why do we need 2 more, or however many he is? In that. He's
definitely in 2 movies at least.
He's in Suicide Squad. I think he's briefly in the Birds of Prey one. He's definitely in.
I don't think he's in Birds of Prey. He could be. I think he's in Justice League though.
He's in a couple of them.
He's definitely sat in the desert at one point, isn't he?
That's Justice League.
That's Justice League. Yeah.
Or is that? Yeah, there's that. See, this is the thing. It blurs into one because it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I mean, who wants to retain these movies in their heads?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So I think that probably leads us pretty well onto further watching, really, doesn't it? Dark Knight Rises and Batman Begins.
I think if you're gonna watch the middle of the story, watch the beginning and the ending of the story.
Yeah, 100%.
It makes the most sense. Obviously, like I did, you're gonna want to watch all Batman movies. Unfortunately, even the Joel Schumacher ones, as terrible as they are.
Yeah,
I think I remember watching a sketch on YouTube around about the time the Dark Knight came out, and it was just afterwards, and so we've got the lines in the Dark Knight. I was like, he's the hero we need, but not the hero we deserve, but not the one we need right now. And I can't remember who it was, but there's this sketch, and they're talking about George Clooney's Batman, and they say the line, "He's the Batman we deserve, but not the one we need right now." And that's why they went for Bale. You know, it's like that. Yeah. That's the sketch. There's elements that are somewhat. I think given a better script, I think Clooney could have been a good Batman. I think it's past it at this stage. Ben Affleck's Batman, I liked. It's just, again, unfortunately, the scripts are surrounding it.
Yeah, I remember when everyone on the internet got upset about Batfleck, and I was like, I can see it. And again, like we've already said, I actually don't mind his portrayal. It's everything around him, like you say, that's wrong in those movies. It's not Affleck. Robert Pattinson's Batman's good. I mean, but as far as further watching, I would watch the animated series. 100%. I would definitely watch the animated movies of The Dark Knight Returns. They're highly entertaining. As long as you like cartoons, I do. You know what I mean? I would definitely check out the Burton Batman movies. I would check out The Prestige. It's not really related, other than he's got Christian Bale in it, and you know, obviously.
Yeah, I think if you want
Nolan, it's a great movie.
I think if you want to watch Christian Bale in an action film, I think there's only one other action film he's in, which is Terminator Salvation,
which is highly underrated. Yeah,
horrifically underrated. I think that, you know, there's great other work of Christian Bale. If you want to see a bit more meat on the bone, shall we say, something like The Machinist, again, The Prestige, not to keep it all Nolan based, but The Machinist, American Psycho. I think it's difficult because when it's something that's so integrated in a universe, shall we say, it's hard not to just say, just go watch Batman. You know,
do you like the Batman movies? You should watch more Batman movies. But
unfortunately, it's kind of
there's not much similar out there you can really recommend. You know, you can't recommend the Marvel movies if you like the Batman movies. It's just not how it works. They're not the same. You can know they're based on comic books, but they're very different films, very different comic books. Marvel versus DC is a war as old as time. You know what I mean? They're not the same things. You know.
I think probably
maybe Logan. You can watch Logan's a good movie.
The closest kind of version of a Marvel film as you will get to the Dark Knight trilogy, and in that it's I wouldn't say it's based in realism, but there's it's
gritty,
a gritty tone to it. Absolutely. And I think as well, we mentioned it briefly, in terms of a gritty kind of tone to it. Watchmen, I like.
Yeah, I think it's a good movie.
I think you've probably taken an hour of the runtime out of it in the middle where it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah,
but I think that's got some dark tones to it, and you know, on the whole is. I mean, if you ask Alan Moore, he'll tell you, "Don't go and watch it. Read my comic." So it's really, it has to kind of be Batman, really, as your jumping off point. Yeah, I think I mentioned the games. If you want to go into a different media format, try the Arkham Asylum game if you haven't already. If you're into games, obviously. If you're not, probably not for you. Yeah. but that's a good starting point as well.
If you're not sure where to start with the comics, get the Killing Jokes, great. All the classics, all the ones everyone's heard of. Killing Joke, Dark Knight Returns, Dark Knight Strikes Again, maybe. What's the one I got over there? That one, it's good. Batman, really, isn't it?
I think that sums it up.
The Michael Caine Lean Mean Tangerine Machine for all your juicing needs. Has extra large capacity capable of juicing tangerines the size of a child. Order now to receive your complimentary bottle of Michael Caine's Tangerine Hot Sauce. It blows your bloody back doors off. The Michael Caine Tangerine Hot Sauce Company.
So that was Bury Our Bones With for this week. We hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed putting it together for you. Please don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us in all the usual social media places as Bury Our Bones With. So please do come by, say hi and send us your comments. Until next time, I've been Jimmy Murphy, he's been Ryan Etherington, and this has been Bury Our Bones With The Dark Knight.
And it will be a one-button job. Boomity boom 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 222.
I have a terrible tendency to just scroll back and you're talking when we're doing it. I still find it slightly distracting.
It's a bit weird, but I think it's a bit weird. But I suppose
maybe if you listen to it back, see if it sounds. I was like, I'm gonna have to stop it. You listen to it back.
Good job I observed that well, wasn't it?
We are your hosts, me, Jimmy Murphy, with Murphy. Hello. Right.
And just remember, this could be the podcast that we deserve.
You need.
But not the one you need right now.